When I was a 22-year-old seminary student, my supervisor took me to a Denver hospital to visit a terminally ill cancer patient. I don't know what I expected, but I was totally unprepared for what I experienced. I walked into his room. I had not previously met him, and as I came into the room, he was screaming in agony, in pain, and yelled at me and told me to rush down the hall and get a nurse to get him some kind of drugs to relieve the pain that he was experiencing. And having never experienced anything like that before, I literally ran down the hall to the nurse's station and told her to come quickly to give him a shot. And she said to me, "He's not due for another 2 hours." And I said, "Well, you have to do something." And she said, "In 2 hours." So I went back into his room, and I had come all prepared to pray with him. I had a Bible in my hand. I was going to read something from the Bible and talk to him about his relationship with God and eternity. And all he did was moan and groan, and he was angry with me because I couldn't get the nurse to give the pain relief that he wanted. So finally, I left. I really never had any kind of meaningful conversation with him. And that moment in that hospital room has haunted me often since then. And I remember thinking, there has to be a better way. There just has to be a better way. And fortunately, we live in different times, and I experience nothing like that today. But I do, as a pastor, encounter families and patients in distress as they make end-of-life decisions. So in a couple of years, maybe 2 years ago, I was at the Minneapolis airport and getting ready to get on a plane when my cell phone rang. And it was from someone who was in the intensive care unit of Minneapolis Hospital and told me that the family was in a bitter fight over end-of-life decisions, and would I come and help them? And I did the best I could over the telephone, and then discovered that part of the fight was over who's going to get the cabin. And finally, they boarded the plane, and again, I thought, there has to be a better way to do this. After my own father died, I sat down with my mother to talk with her about her wishes and her plans. And we discussed things in pretty great detail and candidly. And we talked about end-of-life decisions, we talked about a will, we talked about the trust for the little means that she had. And I helped her find an attorney, and we had multiple meetings, and the documents were signed. And I am the youngest of her 3 surviving sons, and it was decided that I would be the one who would be the spokesperson for her and would have power of attorney, and that I would be the one who would, at some point, make health decisions on her behalf. And began a journey that included lots of visits to her and lots of decisions, a lot of decisions over a number of years that I made in her behalf. Every time I made a decision or a decision was being made, I contacted my brothers who live in different parts of the country, and I informed them, and they trusted me. As my mother got older, she had more and more medications. It was like a dinner plate of pills, and they were addressing the many maladies that she had with advancing age. The physician came to me one day and said, "She's not going to live very much longer, and we would like to have you consent to placing her in hospice care." So I said, "Well, how long do you think she'll live?" And he, of course, didn't know. And I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he said, among a number of other things, "We will seek to keep her comfortable." She really wasn't in particular pain. "And that we will stop all other medications except those that will give comfort to her." So I agreed to this, and the next days, we expected her to die. And what happened was she got marvelous care from the hospice workers. She no longer took all these medications and got better and lived for 7 more years. In fact, She was on hospice 3 times before she actually died. Every time they stopped all these medicines and all the care, she enormously improved. And I was by her side, holding her hand and praying with her when she died. And I thought, that's a better way. That is a better way. Advanced planning for death has some interesting precedent in the Bible. Jacob was one of the great patriarchs of the Old Testament. His biography concludes in chapter 49 of the book of Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament. And it tells how he gathered all of his sons around him, and he gave individualized speeches and blessings to all of them. And then Genesis 49:29 says, "Then Jacob gave them these instructions." He instructed them concerning the final time of his life. Jacob's other name was Israel, and the nation of Israel is named after him. And he is an amazing model of someone who carefully and systematically gave instructions for the end of his life to his family in preparation for his death. Another of the most famous people of the Old Testament was King David, and the events of his life are recorded, the end of his life, in the Old Testament book of 1 Kings chapter 1. David had made no advanced preparations. So as it became evident that he was aging and dying, there was not even a provision made for succession to the throne of Israel, and the country risked yet another civil war. And so those that were closest to him knew that they had to step up. And so it was the prophet Nathan and his wife, the queen, Bathsheba, in consultation with the priest Zadok, and they got together and discussed how they should go about approaching the king about this delicate matter. They laid out a plan. Bathsheba became the spokesperson for these 3. She went in and told him what the issues were, and he agreed. He agreed and, maybe surprisingly, took responsibility for the end-of-life arrangements. So that 1 Kings 2:1 says, "When the time drew near for David to die, he then gave a charge to Solomon, his son." So Jacob initiated end-of-life instructions. David did not, but his family took the responsibility to approach him and make sure that these issues were addressed. The good news part of both stories is that the challenge was taken and the issues were addressed. And I think that this is clearly a biblical precedent for those of us who take the Bible seriously, and an example for our families, that we preferably should be like Jacob and take the responsibility ourselves and give the instructions. But if we are the family members and someone else is not willing to step up and do this, then we do what we need to do, and we come up with a plan and we take the initiative toward them. Now, as evangelical Christians, preparation for death is at the center core of who we are and what we believe. Because we believe that faith in Jesus Christ in this life is the determiner forever, for forgiveness of sins and for all the rest of eternity. And so as evangelicals, we are evangelists. We tell people about Jesus Christ, and we encourage them to make faith preparation in Jesus Christ for when they die. So if there is anybody who ought to be preparing for the end of life, it is evangelicals, because this is who we are and this is what we do. In 1994, the National Association of Evangelicals adopted a statement that speaks to end-of-life medical treatment. The National Association of Evangelicals believes that in cases where patients are terminally ill, where death appears imminent and treatment offers no medical hope for a cure, it is morally appropriate to request the withdrawal of life support systems, allowing natural death to occur. In such case, every effort should be made to keep the patient free of pain and suffering, with emotional and spiritual support being provided until the patient dies. The National Association of Evangelicals believes that in cases where extensive brain injury has occurred and there is clear medical indication that the patient has suffered brain death, that is, permanent unconscious state, no medical treatment can reverse the process. So removal of any extraordinary life support system at this time is morally appropriate and allows the dying process to proceed. Under such circumstances, appropriate action is best taken where there is guidance from a signed living will or a durable power of attorney for health care. Where there is no living will or durable power of attorney for health care, the decision to withdraw life support should be made by the family and or closest friends in consultation with a member of the clergy when available and the medical staff. The National Association of Evangelicals acknowledges that the withdrawal of life support systems is an emotional, difficult issue. However, we believe that medical treatment that serves only to prolong the dying process has little value. It is better that the dying process be allowed to continue and the patient permitted to die. This is especially true of those who know Jesus Christ as Savior and Lord. For as the Apostle Paul said, to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So all of this is to say that as evangelicals, we agree with the now famous statement of Pope Benedict that a commitment to sanctity of life is from conception to natural death. However, we can and we should appropriately plan for and anticipate that natural death with prayer and thought and advanced directives when possible. And that is not to say that there is any expectation that we can anticipate every issue that could happen, or the complexity, or the ethical challenges that might be before us. But in all probability, most things that we will face, we can anticipate and we can plan for. And in those unexpected or unpredictable, unusual circumstances, we certainly are able to establish a process by which they may be addressed. Now, I think it's self-evident that the best time to deal with end-of-life issues is before the end of life. And the problem is that we don't know when the end of life is going to be, and a lot of us are procrastinators, and a lot of us don't like talking about it. So the place to begin is to have the conversation. It's what we say to other people. So I'll say to you what I've said to others, that my wife, Charlene, and I have long ago established living wills that we have signed, and copies of them are with our health care providers. And where I have my primary health care at least once a year when I'm checking in before they will do anything else, they always ask if there is on record a living will or other directive, and I answer, yes, there is, and I am grateful. I am grateful that they asked the question, because it is a good and a right question, and I appreciate that. And it seems to me that those of us who are pastors should be raising the same issue in pastoral contexts, that we should take the responsibility, as many hospitals and clinics take the responsibility, to ask the question. And frankly, it is a topic that probably is not frequently addressed in evangelical churches. And so we need to begin. Now, do I anticipate a day in the near future where people are going to have party conversations that say, well, where do you work? And how many children do you have? And do you have an end-of-life directive? Probably not. That's a few years out before it's going to be that comfortably in conversation. But we can begin the conversation. As a pastor, I have often been by the bedside of someone whose life is coming near the end, and I have either chosen to read, or often they have chosen to have me read, the words from Psalm 23. And it is very interesting that in Psalm 23, there are multiple words about leading and guiding and preparing in advance for going through the valley of the shadow of death. So you know the words. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare, advance, a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.